John, it's an honor to share a stage with you. I don't know if I ever have, so thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
The honor is mine.
You're a giant in well-being studies. You've been around a long time with loads and loads of data sets. And because this is the World Happiness Summit, I thought maybe you would just orient us quickly about the history of world happiness science, that this isn't a new phenomenon, that it's been through iterations, been around a long time. So if you don't mind.
It occurred to me that with a group like this, that are essentially about science with a heart, that you're all involved with data, and I want to celebrate the people who have worked and enabled us to do what we do today. And some of you have been there at those events, and gratitude is wonderful. So I'd like to start with gratitude to Wahasu for bringing this wonderful group together that I'm enjoying. The world has, as we know, too few meetings like this that can give you science with a heart and leaving you afterwards with more science and more heart. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Karen, wherever you are, and the whole team. But we're also grateful because the science won't get where it has to be without data. And that requires a whole lot of more complicated things to happen. So I want to celebrate in part some of the individuals, and it's one of those key people is Ed Diener, of course, whom we all miss terribly. But early on, the primary source of data for the World Happiness Report and much else is the Gallup World Poll. As you know, there are many positive psychologists among you, that Gallup is involved in both sides of the equation, of the data side and the positive psychology side, because Gallup was the host of the happiness summits for several times, and in fact it was, I think, at the 2006 summit that IPA, the International Positive Psychology Association, was created. So Gallup was a prior source of meetings rather like this, where the scientists came together to meet each other, and Robert and I were just saying we really missed the fact that that kind of meeting doesn't happen so much, and Wahasu is a very close part of that. So this is a shout out to Gallup for making the data available all over the world that permit the World Happiness Report to exist. So thanks to all. But then we dig in and said, where did that come from? Well, it was really Jim Clifton who essentially did it, and Dale Muller was the heart behind the poll. And the scientific minds behind the poll were Ed Diener and Danny Kahneman, for whom I'm substituting today. So these are the really important figures for making that happen. Then the existence of those data then permitted the report, but then how did it sort of move in the institutional side? Well, the OECD held a meeting in Florence in 2008 to discuss bringing all the national statistics officers together to convince them what kind of statistics they ought to collect. And so that led rise to the guidelines of 2013 and built up a little head of steam after that. But it still remains true that although formally most of the countries have some subjective well-being data, they don't get it systematically, generally, they don't get it broadly, and it is not yet properly rooted. And we know as scientists that we're not going to be able to do the science unless these kind of data are available, not just collected in our experiments, but with background levels of positive emotions. And Ed Diener was also involved with a lovely study that I helped him with on the side of preparing an inventory of positive emotions, matching on the positive side and testing it out and publishing it and make it available to the various depression inventories that have got. So essentially going in directly into the healthcare field and following that light that he and Seligman had done. So we've got on the positive psychology side Diener and Kahneman, and we have on the data side, the positive psychology, we've got Diener and Seligman. Did I say Kahneman for positive psychology?
Yeah.
Oh, Danny, if he could hear me, would he be wincing? My goodness. Because he didn't like positive psychology, doesn't like positive psychology at all. And this is not a secret. Imagine what a Freudian slip that was. It's my memory, of course, that's doing that. But on this, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, because you just mentioned that you're filling in for Danny Kahneman.
Yeah.
And if someone asked me to fill in for Danny Kahneman, I would be a little nervous. So I was surprised earlier when you said, oh, well, this isn't the first time that I've done that. So maybe you'd tell us about that.
Well, you like filling in. I mean, when I started in this field, I appointed myself Aristotle's research assistant. So if I can appoint myself Aristotle's research assistant, I can certainly stand in for Danny Kahneman if he can't make it. Yeah. The previous occasion was in a final event I was going to tell you about, that the first real move forward into developing statistics at the national level, take it seriously, was an event in November 2010, where it was essentially the people behind it were Jill Matheson, the chief statistician, Gus O'Donnell, whom you heard yesterday as the chief public service, and David Cameron, the prime minister. And if without that troika, it never would have happened. So they had a launch event that the speakers were going to be them, of course, and then they were having an expert panel to follow. And so they had Martine Durand, the head of statistics from the OECD, and they had the head of INSEE in France, and then they had Richard Laird, who's been a key figure in this in the UK for a very long time, bringing us all together and making things happen. And the fourth chair was to be Danny Kahneman, and he couldn't come. So I got a phone call from David Halpern, who was the mastermind organizing these things, said, could I come and do it? He didn't tell me I was replacing anybody, he just invited me. I just happened to be doing trips in Paris and in Marrakesh, and just that particular day was there, so why not? This is just the kind of event I wanted to take part in. Of course, I knew I would be saying quite different things than Danny would have said, because I'm very keen on life evaluations, and at that time he was very keen on binary affect measures, and the balance between them is the right way of getting how you are. I think eventually Richard was telling me Danny thought he really should have gone there, but it was the whole event. The event was covered on national TV in Britain, and they cut off, of course, after the Prime Minister left, so nothing happened. But David Halpern called me the night before, very nervous, and he said, "You're not going to sing, are you?" And I said, "Well, I might. I usually do." And he said, "Please don't," because they had the whole press gallery there, and he was sure that if anything like my singing turned up, that the whole thing would be awful. And so I didn't. And you, what's your next question to me?
Are you going to sing?
Well, I don't know how it would have worked out with the press gallery, because it only works if it's a shared activity that establishes connections among us, right? So you all understand that. So you'll know if I say, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Just like, good clapping. I didn't hear the singing so much. The thing is, I did this in Iceland in their opera hall last summer with an opera singer, so I could just sort of shut up and the opera singer could carry the tune. That role is now yours. Are you ready? If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Now, in Iceland, and it's only happened in Rome aside from Iceland, they did the next verse. Do you remember the next verse? Yes. If you're happy and you know it, stamp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, stamp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, stamp your feet. Now you see you've had your exercise break.
Danny Kahneman would not have done that. So why is it that you do that?
Almost everybody in this room, I'll bet everybody knows why I do that, because doing something together, especially something quasi-musical, brings people together and makes them happier. So when I'm in a lay audience, I ask them, are you happier than you are 30 seconds before? And I explain why that was, et cetera, et cetera. And the second part of it is, I was making a fool of myself. Because in many of these things, it really is, that they had never had anybody sing anything like that in the opera hall. Ever. And several of the talks yesterday said exactly that. You can't expect other people to reach out and connect with each other if you're not prepared to risk your own reputation and sense of self-love to reach out to them.
Yeah.
I told you they'd already know the answer.
They like it. They like it
Well,
a lot.
there's one other scientific purpose of that. Is that it's the happiness, that's an emotional happiness you're applying. Then I go on to say, there is also another use of the word happiness. Are you happy about something? Are you happy about your life as a whole? Quite different question, quite different answers, both scientifically important.
Yeah, well, getting back to science.
Let's sing a little more.
Gus O'Donnell, he looked at happiness as informing policy, right? That we want to do something with happiness science. It's going to be applied. And he started sort of distinguishing these bins in which we could use science to inform life. And I know that you have something to add to that. Would you want to comment on that?
Gus, I think he did a brilliant sort of carry forward. There's no point talking late in the conference if you can't help draw the strings together. He was really saying there's very important stuff for the individuals, for businesses. He said, let's bring governments into this. But it stopped at the natural next stage is what can we actually do to use our science in a specific way with governments collaborating with everybody else to enable better lives, that we aren't already on the menu and so on. So two issues that were raised yesterday were crime and education, and I got two specific examples of what could and should be done and has been done by others for that. So that's why my attempt to carry that conversation forward. The first one's on prisons. Prisons are typically the cesspits of public administrations. They are the absolute worst part of every country's education system. Indeed, most people don't even regard prisons as education systems, but they are. They're just the most expensive and the least effective part of it. You've never heard that? Well, right. It shouldn't be that way. If you're spending that much money on an educational institution, it should be producing good results, and it doesn't. So the Singapore prison reforms of 1998, I heard about this in a policy discussion of international thinkers and advisors, and they went through these reforms and how they did them. It came right out of a a well-being playbook, what they did. They'd never read anything on positive psychology or how you might do these things. So once I got it, I said, well, holy smokes, this is really important. So Robert and I were in a group of people called, we called our book that we did the Felicitators, people that created well-being. And I think you wrote on
Maria Montessori.
Maria Montessori, whom we bring into today's discussion in part because she's so important and does these things, but she's Italian.
Yeah, exactly.
And I took a different tack, and I said, what about thinking about institutions as enablers of well-being? And then I used the Singapore prison reforms and that's where that paper on the Singapore prison reforms came from. Essentially what they did is got all the people who are involved in running the prison together and said, what could we do to make this a more effective process, driven from the bottom up? So they ended up, with a long story, but how are we doing for time?
10 minutes.
Gone or left?
Left.
It should be like an hourglass so you can turn it over and start it going the other way. So we wrote that, we together got together in marvelous places and wrote these papers. And the Singapore prison thing, I keep bringing it up all the time because it was the guards and the administrators and the prisoners. So what ends up happening? Well, it's now been going for 25 years, so we know something about what happens. People who used to come back as recidivists come back as volunteers to help people currently there. The prisoners teach the guards teach the prisoners. They have lots of outside people coming in and teaching people as well. They create a yellow ribbon society to welcome the people coming out of the prison back into society. They've converted working in the prison system from the bottom choice job for people to the top choice of jobs in the Singapore public service. And the recidivism rate dropped by 1/3, and it stayed 1/3 down for 25 years since then. So what's not like about that? And essentially, Gus said he's going to Singapore Public Service College, who's someone there had written this paper and so on. I'm challenging him to go and check with them and see whether it is true that it still works out that well and to bring us up to date, because to me it's a really important example. This is a sore in the body politic all over the world, and it's healable by the skills of people like you in this room. But you need to sort of all come together to do it. Second example, education. Everything works in silos, right? We know to connect is everything. That's the theme of this conference, is to connect. But we don't connect the silos. So all the educational reforms we've been talking about, all over the world, but even including here, they're all within education. The reforms we talk about, looking after people in elder care during, before, after COVID, doesn't matter, any time, creating better lives for older people, it's all done within that narrower institutional context. Why on earth, one might say, don't we use the skills, the lovability, the minds, the curiosity of the two groups we're busy trying to help better, the older who need some surroundings and the younger who need a training in life? But wait, it's being done. So there is a group called iGen, which has now been operating for close to 10 years in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Not a joke, it's a genuine city and a lovely place. And as you can imagine, it's taken very special people to do this. But they take a grade 6 class from the local school, bring it into the elder care facility for the whole year. So they're creating a real life for themselves and for the people in that institution. Well, somebody wanted to offer some money to support a research project, so I said, I know just what to do. Let us tool up to study that, because it seems so obviously smart and a good thing, and it's working well. why isn't everyone else in the world doing it? And that's a separate research question. But first of all, you've got to actually go in there. I think we have some cameras rolling next week that are actually watching from the walls the interactions between these children and the elders. We certainly have diaries being kept by people. So this is very community-managed research, right? So the papers being written by the managers of the facility, by the teachers, by Lara Acton's postdocs and docs at Simon Fraser and Lara and me, so you get all the disciplines focusing in on here. And in Zoom, of course, in COVID, we had to deal with this by Zoom, so you got closer to people than you could otherwise have done. Part of the secret why we got these results. And to see the looks on their faces is extraordinary. And you get the reports back at the end of the year from the families, from the teachers, from the neighbors, from the students, and from the elders. Imagine, this gives them a whole new lease on life. They're in a family. And a family doesn't have to be your own flesh and blood, who are often continents away. It's a new synthetic family that's efficient and created, and it just warms the heart to see how they interact with each other. And once you've seen it, then you say, why isn't everyone doing that? And of course, there are reasons. Everybody's covering their rear ends, avoiding risks. We're letting kids into our elder care facility. Somebody might trip and break a leg. We're letting outsiders into our educational environment. Think of the risks. You know, you're familiar with this in your own lives. You've got to fight those risks. Risk aversion kills innovation. Anyway, what else do you want?
We have 3.5 minutes left. Be forewarned. I know that you just wanted to mention, because I think it's exciting, on Monday, the newest version of the World Happiness Report was published. I think we have a slide to put up, which, if I understand it, was the Dalai Lama's reaction video to the World Happiness Report. I don't know if you can load that.
Oh, can we have that slide back?
I see it here.
It's on our, there it is. Did you get a chance to see this before? Okay, well, this whole meeting is about connections. The report came out just on Monday. I think on Tuesday evening, I got in my email a newsletter from the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And they did a whole article on the report, including this infographic. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and I said, that's better than any summary we did of our own report, especially when it's really focused on the social connections conclusions. So I wrote to them, I said, I'm going to speak in Como. May I use your slide? And they said, we would be honored if you use the slide. Right. So thank you especially for that applause, because that's what I'm going to report back to them, that they appreciated it too.
So one of the interesting things that came out in the report, you've got all this longitudinal data from before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, sort of in these, quote unquote, post-pandemic era, and some of the most distinctive findings have to do with social connection. Could you just give us a high-level takeaway of that?
Well, the puzzle we have in the report, everybody says life is going to hell in a handbasket for everybody. And we said, well, actually not. Because the average reported life evaluation across the world during the 3 COVID years is the same as the 3 previous years. And now there's some bits and pieces and rough edges, in some places going back and going down. We've looked we divided the population into top and bottom shares. How many minutes? He had that look on his face that we're being very close to.
1
minute. I can't finish with that story, but I can tell you that there is a growing gap between the happiest people and the less happy people. But that gap didn't grow any during the COVID years relative to, so it's between the beginning of the Gallup World Poll, and now there's growing gap between the happiest and less happy halves, but it didn't grow during COVID. And so the rest of the chapter 2 is explaining it, and that we've already got on the slide that people have already written down all those things, taken a picture of them, so I don't have to say. But what you can do is come and hear the World Happiness Report panel, which is opening the IPA conference in Vancouver in July, so if that helps as a teaser.
So just to leave us, if you had to create maybe like a logo or a slogan, say, for this finding, what would it be?
What did we agree on?
I don't know.
You think this is pre-cooked? It obviously isn't. Oh, there's so many ways of putting it. I'm not sure which one I said recently, and you said, say that to the group.
Yeah. You said a good one back there, but I can't remember it.
Well, you see, somebody should have written it down.
I think it was the more we get together, the happier we'll be.
Oh, yes, of course. So let's sing it out. Can you do that? This Bob Putnam was in Sweden, and he wrote to me and he said, John, he said, they've got a social capital theme song here. You see, this is all about social capital, all we're talking about here. He's the pioneer of social capital, right? We work together a lot. And he said, they've got a social capital. He said, they translated it for me, and I wrote it down, and he reported it to me in the email. I said, Bob, you sung that when you were a child. No, he didn't. But I subsequently, people sing it all over the world. And you can see, because after all, you know, you only do what you hear and you do what you see, and so you probably already know what the song is. But let's get me off the stage by all together singing it. You ready? If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Stop, stop, stop. That's good. I mean, that means you follow instructions even when you get the wrong instructions. The right instruction is, the more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. And I mean it.